Hey everybody, welcome to EverydayFI. I'm your host, Meghan Combs, and I'm here to say that you do not need $1 million book deal or a famous blog to reach financial independence. By exploring the lives of everyday people pursuing FI, I'll show you how to forge your own path to financial freedom the everyday way. Today is another bonus episode, and if you aren't already signed up for EverydayFI Plus, you will only be hearing the first 15 to 20 minutes of this teaser. But if you want to hear the entire episode and learn everything you can, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast, where you can sign up for EverydayFI Plus and get ad-free and bonus episodes. Today is another episode with David Robinson, and we're going to talk about all things Roth. And I know we're big proponents of Roth accounts and conversions and all of that in this community, but I think sometimes we can go a little too hard on the Roth conversions and the Roth contributions because we worry way too much about taxes. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to first focus on some average retirees, like people who retire around the age of 65. So don't jump off yet, though, if you're like, that doesn't relate to me. Later in the episode, we are going to tie it back to why this matters for early retirement as well, because it's a little bit different. Hey, David, how you doing?
Doing really good. Megan, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's Saturday. I worked out. I got a Christmas tree. It's December 6th for anybody who's listening and is like, Christmas? It's spring already. But yeah, it's sitting on our porch. So the cool thing is we actually get our tree from a charity called TROSA here in Durham, North Carolina, and they actually help people who are suffering with addiction, and they help give them housing and jobs and therapy to overcome their substance abuse. So you can buy the tree and then give money on top of that if you want. I'll actually link that in the show notes for anybody who's in the RTP area. I know there are some listeners who are around here. Definitely hit up TROSA if you don't know about them. They're awesome. But anyway, let's get to the topic at hand. David, you were the one who wanted to talk about this because you're like, people care too much about RMDs. And I was like, really? But why does that matter to us? So yeah, I'd love you to launch into why this matters so much to you, the whole Roth contributions and Roth conversion thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is motivated from a handful of different experiences. One was recently I attended a local presentation by a quote unquote financial advisor. He worked for an insurance company. And, during the presentation, he was really extolling like the virtues of permanent life insurance and all these different things, and which do have their place, by the way. But, a lot. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons it's so misrepresented and people get frustrated with it. But anyway, he was making all of these, what I consider like severe exaggerations about taxation and retirement, and basically trying to scare the people in the room that frankly are not that well educated about these topics, thinking that they were going to be subject to massive taxations, that their wealth was going to be cut in half because of taxes, that they were going to pay way more for Medicare because of high taxes, and therefore they should go and pay for these products. And so that was really frustrating to sit there and watch a bunch of middle-class people who were not going to be subject to any of what he was saying think that they were about to get chipped out of a lot of taxes. So that was one thing.
Yeah, really. What a grifter. God, people like that make me so mad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very frustrating. And what I will say is some of the people, when I have conversations with them who are telling these things, they actually don't know themselves. They don't understand the tax code themselves. They don't really understand how all these things work. Sometimes they don't even understand their own products, especially if they're new in the industry. And so I don't think that a lot of them are intentionally trying to mislead people. I think that generally speaking, it's just they don't understand their own products. They don't understand, frankly, financial planning. And so I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming it's just a lack of experience and education. But it was really frustrating because I could see that it really resonated with people in the room, that they're freaking out about these quote unquote taxes they're going to pay in retirement, when in all likelihood, they're probably going to be in a pretty favorable tax situation, as we'll dig into. The other thing is that I see people, both normal age retirees who are either in retirement or they're still working, and even some FIRE people freak out a little bit about future taxes, about required minimum distributions later on in life. They're like worried about all these things. And I see some people doing massive Roth conversions, getting themselves all the way up into the 24% tax bracket sometimes because they're afraid of RMDs. And anyway, so it's just, I want to go through some of the math of how these things work, because most people out there are going to find that taxation in retirement is actually like very favorable to them. And there's so many ways to control your taxation. And this is true for old age retirees that we're going to talk about, as well as FIRE people. In fact, FIRE people that have young years where they're not working, they actually have way more flexibility in terms of the amount of taxes that they pay. So yeah, I'm super excited to dig into all this.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's dive into the first part of it, which is like you said, the big reasons that you hear of people making massive Roth conversions or prioritizing Roth contributions. There's like all these reasons that they want to do this and might not be, it makes sense, but it's also like you might not need to care that much. So what are some of those reasons?
Yeah, and frankly, I think a lot of these come from people reading things like Money Magazine or a lot of online periodicals and stuff like that give very generalized advice, which always frustrates me. And so people are like, "Oh, this is on investing.com or whatever," and so therefore I need to start doing Roth conversions instead of like really looking at their numbers and their plans and everything. And I want to say that, so always avoid generalized advice. You really need to look at your specific situation. There's a lot of people out there that don't need to do Roth conversions at all or Roth contributions. There's a lot of people out there like myself who are doing like big conversions every year because we're not paying any taxes on them, which we'll get into why that is. So just if you read something on Reddit or on an online magazine or whatever the case, or you saw some guy in a financial presentation tell you that you need to do XYZ, like without looking at your specific situation, you should really like disregard that advice and look at your specific situations. But anyway, getting into some of the reasons that I hear people doing either massive Roth conversions or doing Roth contributions during their working years instead of doing pre-tax contributions, which would give them an immediate tax deduction, are the following. So number one is, the big one is, oh, I think taxes are going to be higher in retirement. I think my tax rate is going to be higher in retirement. This is almost never true. It's just not, because of the way that things like Social Security are taxed, because of the additional standard deduction that old people get, which is an extra $1,600 per person if you're over the age of 65, in combination with a massive standard deduction of $30,000 for a married couple. In addition to the fact that if you have things like a brokerage account, which is taxed at long-term capital gains tax rates as low as 0%, all of these things come together to where even if you're, say, spending $200K a year while you're working, and then you're spending $200K a year in retirement, the taxes that you pay are going to be massively different. And there's almost no situation that I can think of where you'll be paying a higher tax rate in retirement. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand where that comes from, because I've heard, and maybe it's because I just am listening to things that tell me otherwise, but I've always heard that it's the opposite, that you actually have lower taxes when you're retired because your income is going to be less, actually. Just by that alone you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. Like, even if you, because when you look at traditional advice, it's okay, you're spending 80%, you're saving 20%. So in your retirement, you're only going to spend 80% because you're no longer having to save anymore. So that alone, you're spending 80% less than you were spending before. So it's, and I know like the savings part some of it might be taxed, might not be taxed, whatever, but it's, I don't know. I guess I just don't get why people think that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And everything you said is 100% right. I think maybe a big part of it, there's two things. The smaller thing is that sometimes people think they're going to spend more in retirement. I'm going to do a lot of travel and stuff like that. And that might be true, but people's spending tends to drop off. So they might have the first several years of extra spending where maybe they're going to trigger some higher taxes. Still not going to be as bad as it was when they were working, but they might have that. But it does tend to drop off and stabilize, especially when you get into your 70s. But the other thing that I think is the bigger reason for people thinking that they're going to be paying a higher tax rate is that everybody, and they've literally been saying this for the last 4 decades, everybody thinks that tax rates are going to go up. Right. And I used to believe this myself. I was like, back in the mid 2000s when we had like the Bush tax cuts that lowered tax rates to, I want to say 35% for the top marginal tax rate. And back then we were starting to run big deficits and everything like that. And everybody was saying, oh man, we're going to have to raise tax rates soon, yada. And what's been interesting is that if you look at tax rates over time, they've only gone down, right? Or at least been maintained. And it does not matter which party has the presidency. It doesn't matter who has Congress. Obama in a Democratic Congress extended the Bush tax cuts in 2010. You know what I mean? And pretty consistently, both parties seem to want to keep taxes relatively low, maintain them low, but also they really favor retirees. And there's an argument to be made that we don't want to cause retirees to pay a lot of excessive taxes because they're the largest voting bloc. Whether or not that's true, I don't really know, but that's like a pretty commonly cited thing is, hey, we don't want to piss off the old people because they'll vote us out of office. So anyway, it's just,
I don't think you're wrong. The ones who have all the time in the world to go to the polls.
Yeah. No, I think honestly, the old people are more motivated by their YouTube algorithm that's feeding them far left or far right stuff, and they just don't understand that they're being fed that.
I'm not sure elderly folks are on YouTube, whatever.
Yeah,
I,
that's fair. That's a whole separate discussion of the problem with the
yeah,
algorithm.
and I do want to tell folks like I do plan to do some content that's around not necessarily the politics around taxes, but more like where your taxes go and why your taxes matter and stuff like that. But I'm going to do that like down the line, so we're not going to get into that today. But I just want to let you know that yeah, I'm thinking through that and thinking about it from like that standpoint. But
Yeah.
anyway, before you move on from that, okay, you said that higher taxes usually not true for a traditional retiree. But what about somebody who's in the FIRE movement and like retires early? Because obviously, when you think of a traditional retirement, it's, oh, you had a kids' college. You probably had, if you were working, you were probably traveling a lot to work. And so you had the vehicle, whatever. There's all these expenses that you have when you're working and have kids and stuff when you're middle aged and things like that. And that you don't really have when you're a retiree. And then you also slow down when you're a retiree. But if you retire at 45, rather than 65, like that's going to be very different. At 45, you'll probably still have those kids. You'll probably be paying for college soon. You'll probably be still doing a lot of travel and stuff like that for 20, 30 more years. So would you say the tax bracket stays the same as it was when you were working?
No, I wouldn't say that. And all of those things are totally valid. And if you have a young retiree that still has young kids and they're going to be on the hook for that and then college and all that, and of course, travel, yes, they will have probably a higher spending for a longer period of time than old age retirees that will probably have maybe 5 or 10 years of higher spending and then they'll settle out. That's very true. That being said, if you look at the other parts of the situation, the type of person that accumulates enough wealth to retire at 45 is probably the type of person that has a pretty large brokerage account, which is a taxable account outside of their normal IRA and 401k. Those are taxed very favorably, long-term capital gains tax rates.
Yeah.
And I would even say that a young retiree, a FIRE person, they have so much more control over their taxes. It's crazy. Just as an example, like I think the last 3 years, my wife and I have to look at our actual tax returns. I'm pretty sure that we've been, if not zero, then close to zero all 3 years. And we've been doing big Roth conversions each year, which we'll get into. So again, it's like when you have the ability to control where your income comes from, i.e., your savings account that is not taxed when you withdraw it, your brokerage account, which is often taxed at 0%, things like that. Like you really have the ability to just completely control your tax situation. I know some people that have it like almost dialed into the dollar. At the end of December, they do an exact Roth conversion to keep them in some low tax bracket, maybe even 0%. Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
a young retiree have exceptionally good control over the taxes that
Yeah.
they pay in comparison to an old person.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go back to the top reasons why people prioritize Roths. They're afraid of their taxes being higher.
Mhm.
And what are the other 3 reasons?
Yep. The next big one is they're afraid of required minimum distributions. For the audience, in case maybe you've never heard of this, basically required minimum distributions work like this. Throughout your life, you are contributing to a pre-tax account, aka a traditional account, traditional IRA, 401k, 403b, TSP, whatever you had access to. And the government gave you a tax break for doing that. Any money that you contributed to that year gets deducted off your taxes. So if you made $100,000, but you contributed 20 into your traditional IRA, or really a traditional 401k, you only pay taxes on 80,000. That money is going to grow, and then when you hit retirement and you withdraw that, you're going to pay ordinary income taxes on that. The government doesn't want really rich people to basically save on taxes now and then avoid taxation later by just not withdrawing the money. And so what do they say? Hey, once you hit a certain age, it's going to be age 75 for most people listening to this if they're born 1960 or after. Age 75, we are going to require you to start taking out a certain amount of money, basically as a percentage of that. And that way you are forced to pay the taxes on it. Okay. So that's the purpose of the required minimum distributions, or RMDs. So to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like, the IRS puts out a table, I think it's called the Uniform Life Table or something like that. And if you look at that, it will basically show you a factor based on your age. So for example, at age 75, that factor is 24.6. Okay. And what that means is that you're going to take your IRA balance on December 31st of the previous year, the year that you turned 75, and you are going to divide that by 24.6, right? Easy math. Let's say that you had an IRA balance of 2.46 million. 2.46 million divided by 24.6 is 100,000. The government says, hey, you have to take out $100,000 from your IRA. And of course, how is that going to be taxed? As ordinary income. So this is why people freak out about this. That number is going to get larger each year because like at age 81, for example, that factor is 19.4. So it keeps getting compressed. So anyway, that's a background of what RMDs are, how they're calculated, and why people freak out about them. But
And just to be like, if you have your money in a Roth account, it's not subject to RMDs. This is only for 401ks and traditional IRAs.
mhm.
And any other accounts that they need to worry about where it does this?
Generally speaking, any account that's pre-tax, like, it's going to have these RMDs. I have to go to the actual IRS website. I can't remember for 457 actually.
Yeah,
My
457 is an odd
Mhm.
one because like you can like access it when you leave
Mhm.
anytime and stuff like that. It's actually cool. So maybe it isn't, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
gut would tell me that if you did a pre-tax 457, then they're going to have RMDs due. I would say my gut tells me that, but if we find that's not true, we'll maybe put it in the show notes or something. So yeah, that's RMDs. And we're going to talk about the reasons why you don't need to be worked up about RMDs. Like, we're going to go through some calculations to show that it's really not that big of a deal. And sometimes people think, oh man, I'm being forced to withdraw $100,000 that I didn't even need from my RMDs. Maybe I've got Social Security and some other savings that covers all my expenses. I don't want to take $100,000 from my IRA. All you're really doing is paying a tax on it. Like, you're going to pay whatever taxes are due on it. And then you could just reinvest it if you want. You could put it into your brokerage account, and then you still have the same amount invested minus a little bit of taxes. So it's not really like you're forced to spend down your assets. And that's one thing. The other thing is that the government just gives you a number of ways to minimize or even eliminate the taxes from RMDs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I just don't think that this is such a concern for people.
Yeah. Okay. And then we got two more why people prioritize Roth.
Yep. The other one that I keep hearing, and maybe it's because I don't have kids and I'm just like an insensitive person or whatever, but the big thing that I've seen is if my kids inherit my IRA, they're going to be forced to take out distributions over a 10-year period. Either take out some every year or take it all out in the 10th year. They have the choice on how they want to do it. But if you're leaving somebody, say, $2 million, that's $200,000 a year plus maybe some growth. That's going to add quite a bit of income to their income and therefore their taxation. And maybe you're leaving it to your 55-year-old son who is already in a really high tax bracket. You know what I mean? And now this is just forcing him to pay a third of the money in his taxes. And that's definitely a valid concern. But number one, if you've got somebody that's already making enough money to be in the 35% tax bracket, like, hopefully they're financially stable enough that they're building their own wealth, and the tax hit that they take on this inherited money that frankly they didn't earn is not going to be such a big deal. But again, there's some other ways that we can avoid that. Like, maybe we can leave it to grandkids in their 20s and they're in a really low tax bracket. You can leave other stuff to your kids. And I don't want to get too much into it because we're going to talk more about it later. But that's another concern is, hey, I don't want to like bag my kids with a big tax bill. I saw some ridiculous, again, it's one of those insurance people, and they posted on LinkedIn, and I had a client crying in my office seeing the tax bill that they were going to leave to their kids. And I'm like, shut up. That conversation did not happen. Come on. This is made up. Anyway,
Clickbait.
yeah, it's a tough problem to have, paying 35% on an inherited millions of dollars when you're already making a lot of money.
Yeah, boo freaking who. Wipe your eyes with $100 bills.
Yeah, all the people with kids are going to be like, he's being insensitive, maybe. Anywho,
Well, okay, so I don't have kids yet. I obviously were wanting to do that. And I guess I could see if there was something simple I could do to have them avoid this tax bill, then sure, I would maybe want to do it. And so I guess that would be, out of the reasons that we're doing right here, would be the one that I would probably understand the most if this is why you're doing it. But it's a hassle to go through it if you don't have to. And I don't know. I also think, like you said, this guy was posting on LinkedIn, it is a way for certain folks in the financial industry to sell you things that you really don't need, or for them to sell their services that you really don't need to save your kids this money. When they inherit it, you're going to be dead. You don't care.
Yeah.
Not anymore. You're warm food. So I guess I could see both sides. But if it's something simple that you can do, but if it's like super complicated, then I'd be like, they're getting all this money anyway. And I'm also the weirdo who's a proponent of we should pay our taxes. So we don't have to go into that though.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the fourth reason why people go towards Roth?
This one gets cited all the time. IRMA surcharges on their Medicare premiums. If the audience doesn't know, Medicare is broken up into multiple parts. There's something called Part B, which is optional, but you have to pay for it. There's a premium that you have to pay every year. I think starting next year, it's around $200 per month. Don't quote me on that because it's not quite accurate, but IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. So basically what that is, hey, you're a retiree, you are making a ton of money, and therefore we're going to charge you more for Medicare to help support the system, sort of a progressive tax. So people, man, this always gets cited like, oh man, I got to avoid IRMA. And we'll talk about why IRMA is not such a big deal. But basically, if you have a relatively high AGI, you might have to pay additional amounts on your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. And people just want to avoid this. Oh, I can't pay those extra taxes. And we'll talk about why it's not such a big deal. Yeah, so those are like the 4 big things that I hear pretty frequently that I think are, without looking at like a client specific situation, I don't think they need to be as worried as they tend to be.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a quick rating. Also, hit up my Patreon at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast for ad-free and bonus content. I'm Meghan Combs, and I'll see you next time on Everyday Fi.